Welcome. I have a special guest today. He's sort of local, sort of not, a couple of hours away. Jim Hyde. Jim, thank you for joining me.
Oh, my
I
pleasure.
cannot wait for this conversation, which is ironic because I feel like I was dodging you for a while.
I felt like that too.
Totally. So I'll introduce Jim by way of saying he would send me some emails. He opened a co-working space in Healdsburg, which is one of my favorite places, probably like in the world. Healdsburg is a lovely place, and we can talk a little bit about what Jim's been up to there. You say, come over, come, chat, come, let's meet. And it's a couple of hours away. And so I don't get to Healdsburg all the time. And when I'm there, I'm like vacation mode, not co-working mode. So I hadn't been to visit. And then this is a good case study in subject lines. He sent me an email, and I think the subject was what's not to like. And I was like, what does Jim have to say? And so Jim invited me to be on a panel at an event he was hosting. And it's fall in wine country. So I said, yeah, I'll come up for the day and attend the event, which you invited me to do, and dinner and, all the things. And so I got to finally meet you in person. And now you're in trouble because I had such a great time at your event. I loved the people there. It was great to meet you and see what you're doing in Healdsburg. And so now I'm like, Jim, when can we talk? When can we do a podcast?
So it worked. Well, that was my strategy all along. So that's good.
Totally. Now I'm like, how did I not realize who this guy was? So I'm going to read a little bit of, well, I'll give you the quick overview of why I think my listeners will enjoy Jim, because you have to meet Jim in person. He's very special and charismatic, but also I think the work that you do is very aligned with the why of people in co-working in general, right? So that was very clear from the group that I met at the ULI event, which we can talk about in a second. So the folks who are listening who do small scale development in their own communities, maybe own a building and they've put co-working in it, like Jim is kind of all about that. So you've spent, I guess we could say it's in your bio. So I'll say it's been 40 years focused on the built environment, specifically how we build community, how we improve the quality of life in towns and cities, and how real estate development can and should play an outsized role in improving people's lives. So consulting, founding innovation companies, real estate development, and the common threads in that work for you are innovation, sustainability, creating stronger connections to the environment, and helping clients and communities make better decisions through improved processes, better information, and constructive examples and dialogue. But for me, it's like really about sort of just the ethos of what you're up to really aligns with co-working. And you also created a co-working space in Healdsburg, which has a very cool story on its own. So Jim, I met you at the ULI event that you host, which is the small scale developer forum. This was your 16th event, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Wild. Okay. And you also, hold on, I got to look at my camera and make sure you've got it in your background. I've got it here. Jim wrote this book, which I knew about before the event. And then I have an autographed copy from the event now.
You do?
And I was saying to Jim, it's a beautiful book. It's literally beautiful. The photos and also now I know some of the people that are talked about in the book. I was like, wait, they were at the event. Now everybody's going to want to come to this event. So we'll have to be careful about, over creating too much demand for your event for the folks who listen who would fit into that. But I'm struck as I read through it. I'm thinking about some of the folks who've been in my co-working startup school, who are small scale developers like you in your community, who have a why. And I love the book. So we'll link to your book, but so I've been talking about who you are. Tell us in your own words, kind of, a little bit about what you're up to that we haven't covered yet. And, we can start with the co-working space. Well, tell us about your development activities, and then what the heck made you decide that you wanted to do a co-working space, which you actually leased and has a great story. behind it. So give us a little more Jim detail, and then
Wow, yeah, that's
dive
that.
in.
Well, thank you. That was a great intro. I'm going to need to. I have to hire you to do my marketing pitches. That was one of the best ones I've ever heard. So that was great. Yeah, and it was interesting listening to you, because I'm trying to think. Was it co-working that led to, is co-working the manifestation of all the values that I hold about real estate development, or is real estate development the kind of, what drove me to do co-working or something like that? So I have to think a little bit about that. But yeah, the short backstory that I like to share is, so I was trained as a landscape architect and spent many years doing design, and have a really strong passion for design, which you obviously saw when you were here. Believe in the power of good design to really inspire people. But after about 15 years spent in design firms drawing stuff, went back and did graduate work in real estate, because real estate development is, as I like to say, most of the stuff I drew never got built. And it was like, what is it that I don't understand about our clients or the way they make decisions, that I've got all this stuff I'm really passionate about and drawing, and I'm staying up late, and then it all gets pushed aside or something like that. And for me, it was like learning a foreign language, that so much of the world bases its decisions on quantitative economics, math, and we're talking about design and subjectivity. I think that's changed a lot in the last decade, where there is much more appreciation for the power of place, for creating communities, for creating experiences. And, that's what many ways co-working is all about. It's experiential office work, as opposed to just, going to a cubicle. So there was a natural intersection, I think, between what I was doing and, where Craftwork kind of grew out of. The other piece of the puzzle, I'd say, is, most of my work early in my career were very big projects, 25,000 acre planned communities in the Nevada desert, and, big 300 room resorts over in Hawaii and stuff like that. But when I would go and travel to these places, I always found myself wanting to spend time in the nooks and crannies of towns that had kind of had that patina, the warehouse districts, the evolved kind of character. And so it was that small, incremental, accretive, organic kind of neighborhoods that really struck me and caught my passion. And so in many ways, while the big projects maybe helped pay the bills, it was the passion laid in the smaller projects. And so over time, and the Small Scale Developer Forum, which you mentioned, which was founded by myself and a colleague with the support of the Urban Land Institute, you'd mentioned ULI, was really meant to find people that were interested in smaller scale development, not because they couldn't do bigger scale, but because they really believed in the power of it to transform communities, create great places, help rebuild and heal communities in a way that, big institutional development just can't do. And, as you said, 9 years, let's see, we started in 2012. So 9 years later now, we've really kind of, between the book, the 16th Forum, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of other organizations that are focusing on this. And the goal is, not to disparage big development, but to try and elevate small development as an alternative for communities that want to see something different happen in their towns and places. So
I think the book for me, I mean, exactly what you mentioned, like when I travel, I want the nooks and crannies. Yeah, I want the local feel. Like I guess I can, go downtown, or like Chicago is a great example. Like I always want people, Chicago's a gorgeous city.
yeah,
but then it has some amazing neighborhoods with, just lots of good, like cool local, what you call it, like the fabric and the granularity. Like I'm trying to remember the words that you use. I'm looking at the book, but it's like, yeah, you want people to really get into that stuff. And the book talks about like, that's what people like. A lot of people like that stuff. So you put, words to like this feeling I had about places like that. And you're like, yeah. And it can be, yeah. And then at the forum, you do this super cool activity where you had like everybody in the room gets a chance to say for like 30 seconds what they're working on. And it's super effective. I'm going to have to borrow that. But I mean, everybody in that room was working on some sort of like cool thing that was going to make a difference in a community.
Yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it? Just to see that kind of rapid fire, everybody gets 3 slides, 15 seconds each. And it's just amazing to see the diversity and the passion and the kinds of things people are doing and the inspired design and completely, a lot of it's so disruptive and so, unconventional and all driven by people committed to what they're doing, which is great.
Yeah. Some beautiful stories, and some of them doing co-working in various shapes and forms. I think not because some of them had thought about it kind of as a business model. So a lot of my listeners are, get into the pro forma and, figure, but like, because they feel like that's what should be in the building or, be part of the project.
Right.
Which I thought was very cool. So, okay. So we'll zoom back out a little bit, but I do want to mention ULI a little bit more. I had never been, so Urban Land Institute, I've heard mention of it many times, and there are a lot of folks who are in the co-working industry who kind of overlap with the ULI folks. I'd never been to an event before. If somebody's in a local market and is like, yeah, this stuff that Jim's doing is really interesting, do they join a local chapter? Like, what's the inroad to ULI?
Yeah, so you can. I mean, there is the district, what's called the district councils, which are kind of the local, and I think there's about 55 of them around the country now, are where you can kind of engage at the local level, and they become pretty powerful. And they have different levels of membership, like a lot of organizations. The organization itself is about 50,000 members. Wow. It's global. It's probably, arguably the premier research and education and kind of thought leadership organization around the built environment. And they like to describe themselves as a tent maker, meaning they really bring together different disciplines, which is one of the reasons I have spent so much of my career involved, because, I could spend time with, the group of landscape architects or other designers, but we're all, it's like you're hearing the same thing from the same people, versus right. ULI is policymakers, it's capital, it's developers, it's, active citizens. And you have sometimes the tough conversations about why this stuff is so hard and how to make it actually happen. So I get a lot out of it. And you can join at the local level. There's chapters, there's product councils. And then the small scale forum, as you and I talked about, is a national program that we hold twice a year in a different city every time. So 16th one was Healdsburg, and that was our 16th city. And you mentioned the book, and the book was really an outgrowth of the stories and the lessons and the challenges that I'd heard probably by the time we'd gotten to our 12th program, and said, there's just too much good stuff here that needs to be shared, that because it's small and it's so diffuse, people aren't getting a chance to kind of see it as a total story. And there's a lot of power here. So that was really the genesis of the book.
Yeah. And that's how I felt about the forum. Like, you could tell it was special for people to come together and say, oh, these are like my people, right?
Yeah.
And they get to hear each other's stories and sort of validate like what they're working on. Because some of them are like pretty special projects that are, to your point, not always ROI driven. I mean, some return, but really a focus on impact in the community. So, okay, let's talk about your co-working space. And let's tell a little bit. I do have some slides here, which I might pull up.
Oh, okay. Great.
We'll start with you found the building. Yeah, it had a vault.
Well, and maybe back up a little bit more.
Totally.
Beyond the building.
Yeah, tell us the why.
The why.
Just to paint the story, what's the population of Healdsburg?
12,000 people.
12,000. Yeah. So it's like an hour and a half from San Francisco.
Correct. Correct. And it's one of these, what I would call lifestyle communities. Somebody call it amenities. It's a resort town without necessarily the resort. That the town is kind of the resort in many ways, because it's such a special, great community fabric. All the things.
Town square.
Yeah, town square.
The first time we went, I can't remember if we went to Healdsburg before we lived here, but the first like real memory I have of the town square is 4th of July, 2012, maybe.
Okay.
And like you had like what's the little band in the square that play, like, what is that called? The
gazebo?
Yeah, they were in the gazebo, but like
Yeah.
this old timey band playing the 4th of July music, and there's like a little kid parade, and everybody's picnicking in the square. And actually, we sat next to the Banshee folks,
Oh,
who are
okay.
now like such a big part of the community. And
Yeah.
they must have been already in the dog patch or wherever they were, but they were telling us, like, oh, we're going to try this tasting room, on the square. So that was early days, but it was so like iconic 4th of July. So cute. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of in some ways Norman Rockwell meets
Yes.
I don't know, hipster, USA.
Totally.
So it's got this constantly evolving dynamic, which I think continues to attract people that is their psychographic, and so it continually evolves, as opposed to a lot of places that are kind of resort towns and they stagnate because people don't want any change. And we certainly have our challenges here, but it's a good place. And the genesis for this is, as you and I talked about, I mean, passion for community, love the whole co-working thing, had used one when I lived in San Francisco, because I lived there for about 20 years before moving here full time. And it was really when we went to Detroit for the forum, I forget which number it was, but
It was in 2017, because I thought, oh, that was a little early probably for co-working in Detroit.
oh, interesting. Well, it was just exploding, and we actually did and each of our forums is themed around something. So as you know, Healdsburg was about small meets small, meaning small development in a small town. But Detroit was about co-working, urban manufacturing, and makerspace. And so we toured a number of them. And, I just came away from that just so inspired, and just thought the spaces were so cool. And so came home and thought, this is a town that I think this could work. It would be, it's not going to be 50,000 square feet WeWork model, but it could be smaller. And I had kind of envisioned, and you'll appreciate this. I don't know how many of the other listeners on this, but my shorthand when I was trying to describe it to people was Hotel Healdsburg lobby meets Banshee tasting room meets Flying Goat coffee. So it's that kind of a vibe and aesthetic. So it's sophisticated and it's flexible, but it's, kind of busy, and it's local, and it's a little bit eclectic. And so, and I would talk to people, and they said, well, do you think that's going to work here? And I don't know. So I did a survey, and I gave it to the chamber, and they sent it out to their members. And in 2 weeks, I had 80 people expressed interest.
So you had the chamber do the survey for you.
Yeah. Because they liked the idea. They thought it was good, good for them. They're always having people ask about office space or whatever else. So that said, okay, there's something here. And then I in the survey, I said, are you interested in, like, how often would you use it? Would you want an office? Would you want a desk? Whatever. And so I immediately went to the people that selected an office, called them up, went and had coffee, and just sat down and said, what do you need? What are you looking for? What would make this really good for you? So it really helped kind of sort things out for me. And then the other thing I did was I made a bunch of posters that I put up, said opening soon, Craftwork, and didn't put the location, just kind of put it up there, had some cool images from great co-working spaces that I'd seen. And, I started getting emails and calls from people. So it started to validate, okay, there's something here worth going on. So then, as you said, then the goal was to find the space. There was a tired old shopping center that's right around the corner from where I live. I'd walked by it forever, thought it had good potential. Intuitively, and I'm not quite sure why, but intuitively, I always felt it should be a ground floor use and I saw it almost as a retail use that you merchandise, as opposed to an office use that's on the second floor. And I think that actually has proven itself really well. I think people love kind of being seen and being part of the street scene and all that kind of stuff. So it's helped a lot. But the funny story was, so I go to the landlord, and this is a third generation family that owns. So it's classic, small town real estate. The center was built in 1963. So I'm dealing with the son of the guy who built it, who has passed away, and the son and the granddaughter, or her daughter. So the son is 90 and the granddaughter is 67. So I walk in with my flip book, and I'm showing him all these cool pictures of co-working, and here's how it would work and everything. And the son, the elderly gentleman, 90, says, well, I don't know. Daddy said you should never put office in your retail centers. And I'm like, well, don't think of it like office. Think of it like a gym. And this is 5,000 square feet, and there's this thing called Amazon, where I'm not sure in a small town you're going to fill 5,000 square feet. And it's been vacant. So pretty quickly, within about an hour, he says, so if I was an entrepreneur And I needed a place have a desk, and I wouldn't have to like sign a lease, and I wouldn't have to get internet. It would all be there. And that's really cool. I think we should do this. So, kind of won them over, and we, started the process. So it was, as you said, it was an old bank. It was, Wells Fargo. And so it had this huge monolith of concrete, which was the vault. And it was really awkward in terms of space planning, but we were able to work around it. And then, I don't know if you have any of the
So it
images
had
there.
no wall, like was it wide open except for the vault?
Well, the vault, once we gutted the place. So first of all, the place was just like horrific. I mean, it was like your classic, 30, 40 years of just bad sheetrock and bad colors and misuse. And so we gutted it. And underneath it was this beautiful structure. So we were able to like capitalize on that. And then there was this concrete block in the middle. So we literally cut through to remove it was $30,000 and obviously a ton of concrete.
I told Jim, I was like, okay, when we do the podcast, we have to start with, and if you're thinking about using a bank building, because there are lots of listeners out there who are like, oh my God, I did this, the same thing, because bank buildings are so compelling.
They are.
And they're vacant and they're big and they're in a good location, right?
And they typically have parking, which was for us, surprisingly, in a town that is so walkable and so much, bicycle friendly walk, that we just did a member survey. That was like the number 2 amenity, was the fact that we've got free parking. So we're 2 blocks from the plaza and this amenity rich, 3 Michelin star restaurant down to the coolest taqueria you could ever find. But we have free parking, which is great. But so the vault was there. It was going to be 30 grand to remove it. And so we decided we would cut out the back of it. And actually, I'm in the vault now. So you have this thing, it's 18 inches, it's 18 inches thick. We cut out the back of it, lined it with walnut paneling. And behind the image there is, we sandblasted the concrete, put in some glass doors. We had to core drill through the concrete to drop in some Wi-Fi because nothing was going to get in here. And it's cool. We use it for private dinners, for wine tasting, boardrooms. And then obviously people use it for stuff like podcasts and talking to you. So it's great. And it's become a signature feature of the space that really kind of defines it. So it was one of those lemons into lemonade kind of thing. And
you opened February of 2020?
We opened 63 days before shelter in place and COVID, but who's counting, right? So January 6th, 2020, and opened way ahead of plan. Our goal was 100 members in 100 days, and we had 95 members on our 50th day. And revenue was great, way ahead of our plan. I'd been pretty conservative underwriting it. And then March, I think 17th hit. And then, and then it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And so we had 3 really interesting epics. We had a group of members that came in and they said, this is too important to town. Keep billing me. I'm not going to come in, too risky, but keep billing me. This is really important. I want to make sure you make it. And they lasted for about 90 days. And then they said, this is going to be longer than we thought. I'm going to have to terminate my membership. But we had a whole wave of people move up from San Francisco, rent an Airbnb. Shelter in place in Healdsburg is a lot better than sheltering in place in downtown San Francisco. But they had lousy internet and they were in tech. And so they said, we'd spent, 10 grand to bring dedicated fiber to our space. So they're like, we got super fast up and down. They're like, perfect. So they took that on. And then about September, we had the parents that came in and said, oh my God, my kids are still homeschooling. I've got no bandwidth. I can't get anything done. We're going to do it. So we limped through the first year. And then in probably about April of this year, things really turned positive for us. And a big part of our business model, unlike maybe a traditional co-working, a big part of our business model was corporate retreats. So you talked about how lovely Healdsburg is to come to. We thought there was a part of the business thesis was there are corporate teams, C-suite, think tanks, strategy teams that want to come up for a 2-day retreat. And the only place to do that is in a hotel. And typically in a hotel, you got to eat their food, you got to buy their rooms. The rooms
Pay
have
for their AV, all the things. Yeah.
yeah, the workspace, has art on the walls. You can't move the furniture around. So we created what we call the urban workshop, which is a place for about 30 people, highly flexible, super high def TV screen on one end, old school whiteboard on the other end, pinup walls everywhere, big patio doors that go out to our outdoor patio. And the idea was we would capture these teams at 1 and 2 day retreats. They can schedule lunch out. We can bring it in, give them a whole Healdsburg experience. So when we first opened, we had 8 of those scheduled for our 3rd month. And we were like, and they were a couple grand a day. So it was, it was super. And then they all canceled because of COVID, within 72 hours. So that was a real kick to the gut. But still believe that model is relevant. And when people do start meeting, I think it'll be really valuable for us because, everybody wants to get together after what we've all been through. They just don't know when. So,
hey, I just wanted to jump in really quickly before we continue with our discussion. If you're working on opening a co-working space, I want to invite you to join me for my free masterclass, 3 behind the scenes secrets to opening a co-working space. If you're working on opening a co-working space, I want to share the 3 decisions that I've seen successful operators make when they're creating their co-working business. The masterclass is totally free. It's about an hour. It includes some Q&A. If you'd like to join me, you can register at everythingcoworking.com/masterclass. If you already have a co-working space, I want to make sure you know about Community Manager University. Community Manager University is a training and development platform for community managers, and it can be for owner operators. It has content, training, resources, templates from day 1 to general manager. The platform includes many courses that cover the major buckets of the community manager role, from community management, operations, sales and marketing, finance, and leadership. The content is laid out in a graduated learning path, so the community manager can identify what content is most relevant to them depending on their experience and kind of jump in from there. We provide a live brand new training every single month for the community manager group. We also host a live Q&A call every single month so that the community managers can work through any challenges that they're having or opportunities, get ideas from other community managers, build their own peer network. We also have a private Slack group for the group. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go to everythingcoworking.com/community manager. So you haven't seen that come back yet.
Fits and starts. We've had some small ones, but our model was 2 per month, and we're probably getting 1 every other month.
Yeah, you'll start to get there. Okay, I'm sharing for anybody who's watching on YouTube the layout. And I love how intentional this is because you kind of grouped your amenity spaces, well, except for the beautiful fireplace in the front. So let's not forget about that.
Yeah.
But the corporate retreat kind of happens in the back with the patio, and they can sort of spread out and use whatever kind of components that they need to use, right? They can have the vault, they can have the kitchenette, and that's kind of closed off from the workspace.
Yeah. And, there are a couple of really good lessons in all of this. I'd love to say this is a, brilliant linear process that, I came up with this, but this is really the evolution of talking to a lot of people. Natasha Juliana, who runs Work Petaluma in Petaluma, was very generous with her time, spent a day with me up here. And she was the one, originally my idea was most public space up front, semi-private, all the way to private. And she's like, in the city that might be good, but up here, the people in the offices kind of want to feel the vibe of the energy of what's going on in the center. So we came up with this more of the 2 edges focused around the open space. And it really has played out well because people they want to feel a part of the, what's happening in the center core, but also be able to close the doors. The other thing that happened was in the very back there where we've got that second kitchen, as we were building out, I brought in some event planners that I'd met here in town. And I said, walk through, tell me how you would use this. Could we rent the entire space for a wedding reception? We could do this. And so they came to the back and they said, if you had a kitchen back here, you could rent the vault and the workshop and close that off, and people could have breakout space. They could have a caterer slide in that back door. And so what was originally going to be some additional offices in the back there became that second kitchen. So a lot of my design process is talk to as many people as you can and get the benefit of their wisdom and experience, and then just kind of keep, nurturing it through the plan. So I think I drove the contractor and the architect nuts because I was constantly changing stuff.
Okay, so I talked to somebody else and they said, no, I love that though, because you have a background in, the built environment and could have made a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
And yet you still did kind of the bootstrappy things that are the right things to do, like your survey, your posters, all the things to validate that this was going to work and that people wanted this and that wanted, the same thing that you were envisioning. So
well, validate and also customize. I mean, I learned so much from all of those things, talking to people, that, it was really, really good. The other quick thing that I will say, and I can't remember if I told you this when we were together, but I finally had to open the doors. I'm kind of a perfectionist, but I finally had to open the doors, even though I didn't have all the furniture I wanted and I'd run out of money and all that kind of stuff. And that was like the best thing ever, because first of all, there were a lot of things I was trying to do that I have never done. It ended up not doing it all. And it was so good because the space works really well without them. Some of the built-in stuff. But the other thing was, I think there is a culture and a psychographic that likes co-working. I mean, they're entrepreneurs, the people that want to be part of something that's happening. So to come in every week, to come in every month and see the thing continuing to evolve and grow and take on new personality was really fun for people. And they felt a sense of authorship of what we were doing, as opposed to, it was perfect day one and that's the way it was. So they were kind of along for the ride, and it really made them mentally, I think, bigger, mental owners of the place, which has been, really great.
I love that you shared that, because it's sort of a mindset thing. You're either the type that wants it all in a bow before people. I talk about that a lot in terms of pre-selling. Like some people don't even want to pre-sell until it's perfect, right? And by then you're paying rent.
Yeah.
So, the bills need to be paid.
Yeah.
And so if you can shift your mindset, I love the term authorship, to get your community engaged. And they like it that way. So and here's kind of a photo. The space is really beautiful. I also love the cables from the ceiling, because how tall are the ceilings?
Ceilings are 14 feet. And, so we didn't have any power in that center core. So, one of the budget cuts was, well, I can't dig that up and, run stuff in there. So it's like, we'll just get some industrial cords from Home Depot, and we've got all the conduit and the power up there. We'll just drop them down, and it gives it this kind of workshop, cool garage feel. And it's been, great, because again, as we've had to move desks around, spread them out, for COVID, whatever else, it's super flexible, as opposed to having laid out every plug in the floor, and then 3 months in found out we had them in the wrong spot.
Which is another, sort of pro for not having ordered all your furniture, is you had space to spread it apart. I mean, the number of members, I almost don't even want to say this, you said it earlier, is 95 in 60 days, and you had all your offices rented at open. Half of your dedicated desks were taken. But this is again a big kudos to you. Just did the work up front, like the fact that you did the survey and you said, okay, I'm going to go have a coffee with everybody that wants an office, and you're validating that they're real and they mean it. And then, you're sort of pre-selling them and making sure you actually build what you want to build. But I mean, that's a tremendous, pre-sell and fill up effort. And unfortunately it was 63 days in front of a shutdown. So that's sorry. It's not funny at all. But you did the work, and you created, the thing that attracted your ideal members. And you also did here, I'll share this for anybody watching, kind of your ideal community avatar. You did the work on, who are they, what's interesting to them, what do they need, what do they want? So you got really pretty deep into, what is the average age of your member? Your male ICA is 52.
Yeah, it's probably so. I think just a cross section, as I said, we just did a member survey. We're probably, I would say, average is 45, but we span about 30 to 65. I think we definitely skew more older, just because of the nature of town. We
Yep.
skew more professional and kind of independent, solo worker, professional, finance consultant, technology developer, creative artist, journalist, that kind of stuff. So that's a little different than what you might find in a metro area.
Yep.
And we, one of the things we started early on. So a couple of things that early on decided about this was we wanted to make sure that the community loved this and felt this was important. And so, our values around supporting the local economic ecosystem, building high performance workspace for everybody, creating a place for what we call doers as opposed to doers to grow both professionally and personally. So those were things that we, unlike maybe a corporate co-working, we wanted to be a hub for the community. So we have like a nonprofit policy where if your mission aligns with our values, free pro bono space in the evening, half rates during the day. We partner with locally owned businesses to provide a lot of our goods and services, and then promote them to when we have our retreats, or if the people come in, they're the ones that are doing the catering and the drinks, and the local wineries and the distillery that does our cocktails and stuff, and then they give our members discounts. So there's kind of a quid pro quo there where we have special things with all of them. But the idea was we wanted people to feel like this was really important to town and it was part of the town. And it kind of played out when COVID hit and they said, you're too important to go away. So it's, I think that was a big part of our business model and thesis was to be loved by the community and be important to the community so that they continue. So one of the other things that we did was we created this membership category called NRTR, which was not ready to retire. And the thinking was there were a bunch of people who captains of industry, they were living out in Dry Creek Valley now. And it's like, how many times do you really want to have breakfast with your wife in the morning? So I'm going to go out for my bike ride. I'm going to go downtown. I'm going to grab a coffee, and I could come in and sit at Craftwork and check my email and sit next to some person who's developing a business and share some wisdom and create these kind of, organic mentorships and see how that works out. So, and give them a chance to kind of stay connected into the community. And that hasn't played out the way I had hoped, but I still think it's a valid, concept, and something where co-work is not just for young people, and it's not just for work. There's a lot of other things that we can do with it. So
totally. Yes. I think that's one of those, probably a COVID thing too. It'll take time to build. And then you might be fighting them off, all the guys or the ladies who don't want to have breakfast with their husbands, who want to sit in your lobby and read their paper and drink your coffee.
Well, we've had a couple of women do like book club in the evening, get a couple of bottles of wine, sit around the fireplace. So that idea that it's kind of the community living room, if you're a member, it's kind of a club. I used to use the term club working instead of co-working. So the idea that, it's this kind of special place after 5 o'clock, come in and hang out type of thing.
So I think that's actually a really interesting comment, because I think part of your why is that connection to the community. And so you're intentionally trying to create a space that is, people don't think of only for work.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting and will become more of an approach. It's not very common. Most people are very focused on, when you look at sort of the amenities on the website, it's, the Wi-Fi and this and the meeting rooms and but this whole community place where you can accomplish more than one thing is super interesting to me. And I think in communities that are smaller, it works, or even communities that are bigger. There's a woman who was on the podcast, Tessa, I'm trying to think of her last name. She's in Victoria, Canada.
Oh.
And she calls her space Club Quench. And it has a lot of open space. And I think that works for her because she has really actually delivered on this whole, it's a big space. I think it's 25,000 square feet. And so it doesn't have the number of offices that I would expect you need to have. But she has been successful in what you're talking about, like creating this idea, like you come here for more than just work. And so she's selling more memberships that way.
Yeah.
And I don't think everybody can do that or has the same sort of why or the same, maybe place in a community. But I think I kind of love that evolution. So I also want to make sure we cover, you also did an economic impact survey. So you mentioned being important to the community in more ways than one. So yeah, talk about a little bit about the economic impact your members are having in the.
Yeah, and, this was something I've really been fascinated by because, part of the backdrop here is there's a lot of hand wringing about Healdsburg's just all about tourism and, it's just the tourists and it's all about wine and drinking, stuff like that. And so it's like, okay, we've got, 110 members here now. And I think only a few of them are in food and beverage, and the other ones are doing really interesting stuff. So what are people doing and what kind of companies are they working for? And then more importantly, what are they spending downtown? Have we created an epicenter of spending that's supporting other businesses? Because people are buying coffee, they're buying lunch, all the things that you would expect. And in a small town and in a shopping center where we are, which is a little bit tired, that really matters. And I'm also getting, about a year out from renewing my lease, and I wanted some data to at least go to the landlord and say, look at how much value we've created for our neighbors in this center, let alone downtown. So, I would say this isn't a highly statistical survey, but we just sent a survey out to all our members. We had about a 50% return rate. And we asked them, how much do you spend weekly on neighboring businesses? And then how much do you spend in downtown? So including what you spend in the neighboring businesses. Because I wanted to know neighboring businesses for conversations with the landlord and downtown as a larger part of conversation and PR, to the community leaders. And you can kind of see the numbers there. But so the short soundbite is when you extrapolate these numbers over 52 weeks a year, and then what we spend through our craft partners programs with local vendors and providers, cleaning, hiring a local cleaning firm, all those kinds of things, it comes out to about $250,000 worth of impact. So to me, that's material. That really matters, and I think is important. And I think just taking the time to understand that and explain the value creation, to people is really important. So I would encourage anybody that's operating one of these to try and figure out. I tried to see if there was any data out there on there. And then there were a few people that had kind of done similar surveys. There's obviously no industry data, but I think it's a really important part of the story that needs to be told that, we're creating jobs, we're creating economic value for surrounding businesses. And in this case, the non-quantitative but qualitative value add is people come into the space and they're like, I had no idea this has done so much for this part of town or so much for this shopping center, which was like so tired and run down. And now this is great. So, I feel like it had a lot of value in both economic terms as well as kind of psychic rewards to the community.
Yeah, I love that you did that. And to your point, I hear people attempt to do it, and I think it's an important, and even again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just send it out, get some data. And I loved, just again, I'll put the link to your book in the show notes. But I pulled a stat. You're talking about kind of the economic impact. Small business in general, I was really surprised about the stat. It's early in the book, and it says a 2012 analysis of the Salt Lake region showed that 52% of small business dollars recirculated in the local economy versus 13% for national chains. And, again, it's just kind of, there's a place for both, but an argument for the impact that small development can have on a community. And I think for anybody who's thinking about, building locally or doing a co-working space locally, the book has a lot of good stats and just kind of ways of thinking about things if you're working with your local, economic group or the folks who make the decisions about what goes in. Jim, I'm curious, since you are a real estate developer, you signed a lease on this one. would you build next time? What do you think about the model, lease
Boy,
versus
it's
own?
yeah, no, great question and really tough because it was like, um, because it was an older center and very tired, my rent structure was very favorable, but I had to pay for all my TIs. So, $100 a foot to build out, 6 months free rent,
Yeah.
75 cents to $1.50, at the peak year. So our operating costs are relatively low, which was great during COVID. I didn't have like a big mortgage payment or something to make. But you wonder, so I spend $500,000 to build out the space. And unless I renew the lease, that's kind of like lost money. It's going to be a long time coming back. So it's a tough dilemma. I mean, the larger strategy was this to be a catalyst or a flywheel for other things I would like to do in the surrounding area. So really use this to drive energy, create brand. I mean, it's a little bit what we call phase in the building small world, phase 0.0, where you kind of establish a place and get it on the map and create some activity. It's, the cool factor, and then are able to do real estate that creates value as a result of that. But still in the early stages of that. I think if I could have bought something, I probably, with an SBA loan or something like that, would probably prefer to do that. It's just the real estate here is so insanely expensive that, you can't, it's the delta between a monthly rent payment and knowing that, you're done in 5 years versus taking on a sizable mortgage and then not sure what's going to happen is, for all the other risks I was taking on, that seemed like the best way to manage risk. So.
Yeah, no, I like it. And your comment about sort of phase 0.0, that was a big takeaway for me from your event, is that not everything has an immediate or clear ROI. Like when I talk to people about opening a business, I'm always opening a co-working space specifically, very concerned about their financial goals and helping them understand, like, well, what does it look like to create that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your group had a lot of mixed whys. Like maybe it's because it makes a big impact on the rest of the project and we're not overly concerned about, the actual cash flow from that part of the project, or to your point, you've got a longer term plan and this is part of the plan, and so this is not the end goal, and
right,
or you just it's a legacy thing, right? Your place making in the community that you live in and making a huge impact in the community, and maybe that's something you just wanted to get done.
Yeah, there. I mean, it was all of those, and I think the key though is in any of this stuff, and we hear it in any of the colleagues that are doing the building small thing. I mean, it is about patient capital, and it's about, as I talk about in the books, one of the hallmarks of small is real estate as the means to the end, as opposed to the end itself. And I think so much real estate has gotten, divorced from its purpose and the humanity of it, versus building small is really about creating these great places that lead, the end result is great places and great community, using the real estate as the vehicle to create that. Now, it can't be philanthropy, but it can be a different calculus in terms of the way you look at return and value creation.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, that was kind of the takeaway, right? It's not philanthropy, but there's a lot of commingled whys.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Jim, I feel like I could talk to you for days and ask you more questions, but I think I probably should let you get back to your day.
Well, this was so much fun, Jamie. Long overdue, but so much fun. So.
Totally. Wait, before we go, actually, speaking of your day, because I think people always wonder this, how do you spend the day? Are you in the space most of the time? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so the short answer is yes, I'm in here a lot. I spend a lot of time fiddling with the dials on this. As anybody, that's doing co-working or entering co-working knows, it's all about the community manager. So I do have a great community manager. And they kind of, run the day-to-day and the meet and greet and putting out the drinks and snacks and all that stuff, which, by the way, we do for free, which adds a little premium effect and is money well spent for sure. And then I'm around, so I have a desk here. I work here. I work on my real estate projects. I work on, my speaking and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice being in the space. And it wasn't always that way. For the first probably 6 months, I was not here. kind of intentionally. But I found I liked being in here, and I liked being around, and I liked meeting. I love it when somebody comes in for a tour and I can go over and say hi and how'd you hear about us and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, personally, it's very fulfilling in that sense. So yeah. And I would say in a given week, I'm probably spending 10 hours a week on this, checking the numbers, making sure we're on, because it's still a bit razor thin. You have to constantly fiddle with the dials and make sure you're not, running afoul of the numbers, but, touring people and trying to sell people and events and all that kind of stuff. But it's still a labor of love. So it's okay.
I love it. Awesome. Well, we'll let you get back to your many labors of love. And yeah, thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, no, thanks. It was really great, Jamie. So look forward to seeing you again.
Oh, believe me. Yeah, Healdsburg is on the list now that I have a co-working space. I can do my own personal quarterly offsites up there.
Yeah, great. And you've got the website, I presume, for this in your chat.
Yeah, so we'll link up to all the show notes. So you can look at the pictures, Jim's book, Jim's website, and all the things you can find in the show notes. So we'll make those readily available.
Well, thank you. And thanks for all you do and all the work that you're doing and the way you pulled the industry together and share these lessons. And, this is really valuable. I mean, the one thing I was going to say is that when we started, was it the real estate or was it the co-working, what led? And I think in my kind of journey through all this is such an open source kind of personality that I think people want everybody to succeed. So I was so amazed at how gracious everybody was with sharing numbers and sharing ideas and sharing lessons. And to me, it's emblematic of what real estate could be, because people want to do the right thing and they see that, the rising tide lifts all boats. So
likewise.
It's great.
Yep. It takes a village.
Yes, it does. It does.
Thanks, Jim.
So,
Bye.
all right, Jamie, thanks so much.